How do you create training that isn't boring? This is one of the most common questions I get asked because it's really important. You spend all this time trying to teach people things, but as we all know, knowledge isn't power. Knowledge is potential power. It only becomes real power when people put that knowledge to use. And so it's all well and great if you're creating these great experiences for people to bring in all this knowledge, but if you don't build that training experience in a way that allows them to put that information, put that learning engagement to use in their real life, then it's just not really going to make a difference. I spent over a decade teaching people how to fly planes, run marathons, and build rocket ships. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this problem of how do you actually design effective learning experiences. And so today, I want to share with you my 3-part framework for making sure that happens. If you're new to the channel, my name is Matt Jertson. I'm the founder and chief learning officer of Better Everyday Studios, instructional design consulting company that focuses on helping organizations create more impact with their employee training. Before I did this, I was an instructor pilot in the US Air Force, and then I led training and development at SpaceX.
This is Elon Musk.
Let's get started. As I said, there's a 3-part framework for designing effective learning. And the first part of that framework is really specificity. The most common reason why training programs fail is because they're simply trying to do too many things. You have a course on leadership training or unconscious bias, and it's just really broad. And if it's really broad and giving you kind of a smattering of a whole lot of ideas, there's very little chance that it's going to be effective. The reason why this is true is because what learning really is from the brain's perspective is building neural connections. And the way we go about the world, the way we can do anything from open doors to ride a bike to read, is because we have something called mental models inside of our brains. And mental models are basically these very strong webs of neural connections that help us quickly understand the world around us. So that rather than every time you walk up to a door, you have to kind of look at it and figure out, what are those hinges? What is this, a doorknob? And like learn how it opens. You just know what a door is, and you don't have to consciously, figure it out. You just know because you have a mental model of what a door is. The thing is it's hard to build a mental model, right? It's hard to make neural connections. Our brain doesn't like to use energy. It already uses enough. And so in order to build those mental models, you want to start by building them as small as possible. I always like to go back to an example from Tiger Woods, who, when he would go out and practice, he wouldn't spend a day practicing golf. He wouldn't spend a day, hitting his sand wedge in the sand. He would spend a day hitting his sand wedge in the sand in the rain, right? Like it was very, very focused. And any high-performing athlete that you ever meet will be very specific when they are trying to practice individual things. Back when I was a swimmer, I remember spending an hour just practicing flip turns again and again and again. And, almost the more advanced you are, the more specific you end up being of what you are trying to practice. So that's the first step in making effective learning, is making sure that whatever you're trying to teach, you are trying to teach one thing, and you are as specific as possible about the one thing you are trying to teach. Once you've narrowed in on what the specific thing is you're trying to teach, the next thing is to build those connections in the brain. So you've identified the mental model that you want to create. Now you need to reinforce that model again and again, because connections in the brain, really what you're trying to build are 2 things. You're trying to create stronger connections between the synapses, the different neural cells in your brain. The more often they fire together, the stronger that connection becomes. And second, you're trying to heavily myelinate the neurons that are inside of your brain. The more a neuron fires, it gets covered by this substance called myelin. And that myelin makes it easier for that neuron to fire again. So you have the mental model, and now you're trying to reinforce that mental model through 2 different options. You can build those connections either through repetition or emotion. Those are the 2 options that you have. So repetition, we're all very familiar with it. Any good presentation, the way you do it is you tell people what you're going to tell them. You tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, right? Those 3 points provide a little bit of repetition, some reminder for the brain. A common thing in learning is drip learning, right? Where after the training engagement, you maybe send a few emails afterwards, ask them a couple questions. You just want to build in as much repetition as possible to help reinforce those neural connections in the brain. And then the other option of emotion is also really easy to do, because in a heightened emotional state, it makes us easier to remember things. things. And the simplest way to do that in a training setting is with a competition, right? You put up a leaderboard, you divide some teams, you have, maybe some trivia that you ask. That additional energy, that emotional energy is gonna make the learning all that more impactful. And so now you have this mental model, you have this knowledge that you've really gotten into the brain, you've drilled it in, you've reinforced it with some emotion, some competition or some repetition through continuously reinforcing the same idea. But if people can't connect the things that they're learning in that training to their daily life, then they're not going to engage that mental model. If you've ever read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, his model of habit formation always starts with a cue. There has to be some cue in the environment that triggers the behavior. And that's the same thing with learning. If you don't connect this learning to everyday life, then they're not going to be able to access that information when you want them to. And so the way you make sure you cue this up is by building context. You need to think about the kind of language that they would be using inside the organization. If you're making a training on how to do goal setting, does your organization talk about goals or OKRs or KPIs? What's the terminology that you're going to use? Another way to contextualize training is with timing. If you're going to do a training on feedback, do it right before the annual review process so that people have that as kind of their context of, oh, this is what we're getting ready to do. And so if you want to make effective training that doesn't bore people and that they actually engage with, these are the three things you have to use. You have to get really specific about what you're trying to teach. You have to build connections in the brain through either repetition or emotion. And then you have to make sure that learning is contextual to the environment that you want them to put that lesson to use in. If you do these three things, I guarantee you, your training, your learning engagements are going to be much more effective. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, make sure to like the video down below, and we will see you next time.